Admiral Park Tae-ho was drinking his morning coffee when the galaxy changed forever. The communication array at Luna Command had been quiet for weeks. Most alien species avoided talking to humans unless they absolutely had to. They thought humans were dangerous. They were right. The first signal came at 600 hours. It was weak, broken, and desperate. Park put down his coffee and walked to the main screen. The technicians were already working to clean up the transmission. What they found made everyone in the room go silent. "This is Ambassador Keith of the Cathari Coalition," the voice said through the static. "We are calling all species in the galaxy. We need help, please, we are dying." Captain Kim So-young looked up from her station. She was the best at understanding alien languages, and even she was having trouble with this one. The aliens were speaking so fast, so scared that their words were jumbled together. "Sir," Kim said to Park, "I think they're really in trouble." Park nodded. He had fought aliens before. He had seen them afraid. But this was different. This was terror. The message continued. "The HFY swarm has taken 47 of our worlds. Our fleets are gone. Our people are being consumed. We have asked everyone for help." The Galactic Union said no. The Trade Federation ran away. The Stellar Republic closed their borders. Park raised an eyebrow. Those were big powers in the galaxy. If they wouldn't help, the situation was very bad. "We know what other species say about humans," the alien voice went on. "They say you are violent. They say you are monsters. They say you do terrible things in war. We don't care anymore. We need monsters now. Please help us." The transmission cut to static. Dr. Lee Dong-woo was the first to speak. He was in charge of dealing with alien species for Earth. "They're offering everything they have," he said quietly. "Technology, resources, even servitude. They're that desperate." Kim worked at her console trying to get more information. "Sir, I'm picking up more transmissions from their space. It's not good. Whole star systems are going dark." Park had heard stories about the HFY swarm. Most people thought they were myths, a species that ate entire worlds, growing stronger with each planet they consumed. If the stories were true and if they were real, then the Coalition had good reason to be afraid. "Get me General Choi Min-ho," Park ordered. Within minutes, General Choi's face appeared on the screen. He looked tired. He had been dealing with pirates near the outer colonies, and the fighting had been brutal. "Even for humans, you saw the transmission?" Park asked. "I did," Choi replied. "They want us to save them from the swarm. Can we do it?" Choi was quiet for a long moment. "Admiral, we've been preparing for something like this since we first met other species. We hoped we'd never need to use those preparations. But if the HFY are real and if they're as bad as the stories say, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking they asked for salvation. They're about to learn why the galaxy fears us." The decision to help came quickly. Earth's Global Defense Council met an emergency session. The representatives from each nation looked at the data Kim had gathered. More transmissions were coming in from Coalition space. Entire fleets were disappearing. Planets were going silent. "The mathematics are clear," said Dr. Lee. "At their current rate of expansion, the swarm will reach our space within 2 years. If we're going to fight them, it's better to fight them now, while they're still busy with the Coalition." "What about our reputation?" asked the representative from Europe. "The other species already think we're too violent." General Choi smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. "Ma'am, our reputation is exactly why the Coalition called us. Every other species has failed against the swarm. They need someone who fights differently." "How differently?" she asked. "Completely. The vote was unanimous. Earth would help the Coalition. But there were conditions." Park found himself back at Luna Command, preparing humanity's response. Kim had been working around the clock to establish better communication with the Coalition. The news was getting worse by the hour. "They've lost their capital system," Kim reported. "The swarm consumed 3 billion Cathari in less than a day. How many ships do they have left?" "Maybe 200 scattered throughout their territory. That's all that's left of a fleet that once numbered in the thousands." Park looked at the star charts. Red markers showed where Coalition worlds had gone dark. The pattern was clear. The swarm wasn't just randomly destroying. They were learning, adapting, growing smarter with each victory. "Send this message to the Coalition," Park told Kim. "Tell them help is coming. Tell them to hold on a little longer." "What should I tell them about what we're sending?" Park thought about that. The Coalition had asked for salvation. They had begged for monsters. Earth was about to give them exactly what they asked for, and Park wasn't sure they understood what that meant. Tell them Earth is sending its best, he said finally. As Kim sent the message, Park looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, an ancient enemy was consuming entire civilizations. The galaxy's great powers had refused to fight. Only humanity had said yes. The coalition thought they were desperate enough to accept help from monsters. They thought they understood what humans could do in war. They had heard stories about the Vrex pirates, who had tried to raid human colonies and been hunted to extinction. They knew about the Thakari raiders, who had threatened human trade routes and simply disappeared one day. What they didn't know was that humans had been holding back. The galaxy thought human warfare was brutal, because they had never seen humans when they stopped caring about being civilized. Park picked up his communicator and sent a message to Earth, 3 simple words that would change everything. Activate Project Cerberus. Within hours, 3 of humanity's most dangerous military units began preparing for deployment. Units that most humans hoped would never be used. Units that existed for one purpose: total war. The coalition had pleaded for salvation. Earth was sending its monsters. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when humanity stopped pretending to be civilized. Project Cerberus had been humanity's darkest secret for 30 years. Hidden in files that most government officials never saw, it was a plan for total warfare that Earth's leaders hoped they would never need. The plan was simple and terrifying. If humanity ever faced complete destruction, they would unleash 3 military units that had no rules, no limits, and no mercy. Commander Yoon Jae-sung got the activation order while he was training in the deep space facility near Pluto. He had been expecting this call for years. Every member of the Ghost Battalion had been expecting it. They were soldiers who had volunteered to become something more than human and something less. Ghost leader to all units, Yoon said into his communicator. We have activation. This is not a drill. Around him, his soldiers began preparing for deployment. They moved differently than normal humans, faster, more precise. The neural implants in their brains had changed them in ways that made other people uncomfortable. They felt no fear. They felt no pain. When they looked at an enemy, they saw only targets to eliminate. The Ghost Battalion had been created after humanity's first real war with aliens. The Vrex pirates had been fast and brutal, but they still fought like normal creatures. They retreated when hurt. They panicked when surprised. Humans had realized they needed soldiers who would never retreat and never panic. So they had made some. Each ghost soldier had undergone months of surgery and conditioning. Computer chips in their brains regulated their emotions. Chemical implants in their bodies eliminated fatigue and pain. They could fight for days without rest, survive in any environment, and operate equipment that would kill normal humans. The price was high. Ghost soldiers couldn't turn their enhancements off. They lived every day in a state of readiness for war. Most of them couldn't have normal relationships. They couldn't feel happiness or sadness the way other people did. They had traded their humanity for the ability to protect it. Colonel Song Ha-na received her orders at the Mars orbital shipyard. The Reaper Corps was humanity's answer to enemies who hid behind shields and armor. Their job was simple: destroy things so completely that they could never threaten anyone again. Song looked at the massive warships in the dock around her. Each one carried weapons that were banned by every galactic treaty humans had signed. Planet crackers that could split worlds in half. Atmospheric igniters that could burn the air off entire continents. Gravity bombs that could collapse suns, ma'am, said her second-in-command, Major Lim Bora. The weapon systems are fully loaded. We're ready for immediate deployment, Song nodded. She had trained for this moment, but she had hoped it would never come. The Reaper Corps existed because humans had learned that sometimes the only way to stop evil was to become something worse. The ships around her looked like floating cities, but they were designed for one purpose: ending civilizations. Each vessel could sterilize a dozen worlds before needing to resupply. The crews who operated them were carefully selected for their ability to make terrible decisions without hesitation. Begin final preparations, Song ordered, and send a message to Earth Command. Tell them the Reapers are ready to do what needs to be done. Captain Nam Ki-jun was aboard his flagship when the orders came through. The Phantom Fleet existed in a dimension between normal space and something else. Their ships used technology that human scientists barely understood. Reverse-engineered from captured alien vessels and improved with human ingenuity. The Phantom Fleet's ships could appear anywhere without warning. They could pass through solid matter. They could exist in multiple dimensions at once. The crews who operated them had been exposed to energies that changed them on a fundamental level. They saw reality differently than other humans. All ships prepare for dimensional shift, Nam ordered. His voice carried through space itself, reaching his scattered fleet without using normal communication. Nam's ships didn't look like human vessels. They were sleek, angular things that seemed to bend light around them. Watching them was like looking at something that wasn't quite there. Aliens who encountered the Phantom Fleet often reported seeing ghost ships that appeared and disappeared without explanation. The crews were as strange as their ships. Exposure to dimensional energies had given them abilities that frightened other humans. They could predict enemy movements. They could sense danger across vast distances. Some could even step partially out of normal reality. As the 3 military units prepared for deployment, civilian analyst Han Yu-jin worked frantically to understand their enemy. She had access to every piece of intelligence Earth had gathered about the Vashitai swarm, and what she found made her wish she had chosen a different career. The swarm wasn't just another hostile alien species. They were something much worse. Every world they consumed made them stronger. Every species they encountered taught them new ways to kill. They had been growing for thousands of years, and they had never been stopped. "Sir," Yu-jin said to Dr. Lee, "I don't think we understand what we're fighting. The swarm doesn't just destroy civilizations. It learns from them. It takes their knowledge, their technology, their biological advantages. Every victory makes it more dangerous." Lee looked at her data with growing concern. "How many species have they consumed?" "At least 300 that we know of. Maybe more, and each one made them better at war." The implications were staggering. Humanity was preparing to fight an enemy that had absorbed the military knowledge of hundreds of civilizations. The swarm had seen every tactic, every weapon, every strategy that the galaxy could offer. They had counters for everything, except they had never fought humans. As the final preparations were made, Admiral Park received one last transmission from Coalition space. The voice was barely recognizable as the same alien who had first called for help. It was weaker, more desperate, filled with an exhaustion that came from watching everything die. "Human ships," the voice said. "We know you are coming. Our long-range sensors show your fleet moving toward our space. We want you to know. We understand now why other species fear you. We have heard the stories. We know what you did to the pirates who threatened your colonies. We know what happened to the raiders who attacked your trade ships." The transmission paused, filled with static and the sound of distant explosions. "We don't care anymore. We need monsters now. We need someone who will do what others cannot, please. Show them what real monsters look like." Park looked at the deployment orders on his desk. 3 military units that represented humanity's capacity for absolute warfare. Soldiers who had given up their humanity to protect it. Ships that carried weapons of extinction. A fleet that existed partially outside reality itself. The Coalition had asked for salvation. They had begged for monsters. Earth was about to give them both, and Park wondered if they would be able to tell the difference. He signed the deployment orders and sent them out. Across human space, the 3 most dangerous military units ever created began moving toward enemy territory. They carried with them humanity's promise. The swarm would be stopped. The price of that promise was something the galaxy would have to live with forever. The human fleet arrived at the edge of Coalition space to find hell itself waiting for them. What had once been star systems full of life and light were now dark voids filled with massive organic structures. The Vashitai swarm had grown beyond anything the Coalition had described. Their bioships stretched across entire solar systems like a living disease. Admiral Park stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at the enemy through the main view screen. He had fought aliens before, but nothing like this. The swarm ships looked like they had been grown instead of built. They pulsed with their own light, connected by streams of living matter that formed a web across space. "Sensor report," Park ordered. "Sir," said the sensor officer, his voice shaking. "I'm reading over 10 billion individual organisms out there. They're not separate ships. They're all connected. It's like looking at one massive creature." Park nodded grimly. Intelligence had been wrong about the swarm's numbers. This wasn't an invasion force. This was a living wall of death that had consumed everything in its path and grown into something that defied imagination. "Communications. Send a message on all frequencies." Park said calmly. "Sir, tell them they have 10 minutes to withdraw from Coalition space. Tell them this is their only warning." The bridge crew looked at him like he had lost his mind. They were facing an enemy that outnumbered them 1,000,000 to 1. and he was giving them an ultimatum. The swarm's response came immediately. Billions of bioships surged toward the human fleet like a tide of living darkness. They moved with perfect coordination, each organism knowing exactly where it needed to be. They had consumed hundreds of civilizations, and they knew how space battles worked. They would surround the humans, overwhelm their defenses, and add their ships to the ever-growing mass. They discovered their first mistake within seconds. Commander Yoon's Ghost Battalion didn't engage in ship-to-ship combat like normal human forces. As the swarm ships approached, transport beams activated across the human fleet. Hundreds of ghost soldiers disappeared from their ships and reappeared directly inside enemy vessels. The swarm had never experienced anything like it. Their bioships were designed to fight other ships, not boarding parties that could teleport directly into their vital organs. The aliens inside found themselves facing enemies who felt no fear, no pain, and no mercy. Yoon materialized inside what appeared to be a swarm command vessel. Around him, he could see other ghost soldiers engaging the enemy. The aliens looked like a cross between insects and squid, with multiple arms and eyes that glowed with their own light. They were fast and strong, but they had never fought anything like the ghosts. The neural implants in Yoon's brain analyzed enemy movements faster than conscious thought. His enhanced reflexes let him dodge attacks that should have been impossible to avoid. When he struck back, his weapons cut through alien flesh like paper. But the real advantage wasn't individual skill. It was the way the ghost soldiers fought together. Their neural implants were connected to each other, creating a shared consciousness that let them coordinate perfectly. They moved like one organism with hundreds of bodies, each one knowing exactly where the others were and what they were doing. The swarm's hive mind, which had been an advantage against other species, became a weakness. When one alien felt pain, they all felt it. When one died, they all experienced the death. The ghost soldiers turned the aliens' greatest strength into their greatest vulnerability. While the boarding action continued, Colonel Song's Reaper Corps demonstrated why humans were banned from most galactic conflicts. Their opening attack wasn't aimed at the swarm ships directly. Instead, they targeted the space around them. Song's flagship fired a single weapon into a nearby nebula. The compressed gas and dust particles ignited in a chain reaction that spread across light years. Swarm bioconstructs that had taken decades to grow were vaporized in minutes. Entire formations of enemy ships simply ceased to exist. Target the gravitational anomalies, Song ordered coldly. Maximum firepower. Her ships opened fire on the black holes and neutron stars that the swarm had been using as anchor points for their formations. Gravity bombs destabilized the objects, creating massive gravitational waves that tore through enemy ships like invisible tsunamis. The swarm had never faced an enemy that was willing to weaponize the fundamental forces of the universe. They had learned to counter energy weapons, kinetic weapons, even exotic matter weapons, but no species had ever been insane enough to turn gravity itself into a weapon of war. Captain Nam's phantom fleet struck from angles that shouldn't have existed. His ships appeared inside swarm formations, fired devastating volleys, and disappeared before the enemy could respond. They attacked from above and below, from directions that had no meaning in normal space. Nam's flagship phased through the hull of a massive swarm bioship and planted antimatter charges directly in its core. The explosion lit up the surrounding space and took out dozens of nearby vessels. Before the swarm could react, the phantom ships were already gone, appearing elsewhere to repeat the process. All units target the neural clusters, Nam ordered through dimensional space. Cut the connections between their ships. The phantom fleet had discovered something that other species had missed. The swarm ships weren't just connected physically. They shared a quantum entanglement that allowed instant communication across vast distances. By targeting the quantum nodes, the humans could break the hive mind's coordination. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. For the first time in their existence, the Vashitai swarm was not just losing. They were being completely outfought by an enemy that used tactics they couldn't understand. The Ghost Battalion turned their own hive mind against them, using the aliens' shared consciousness to spread panic and confusion through their ranks. Every ship they boarded became a source of terror for the entire swarm. The Reaper Corps didn't just destroy enemy forces. They eliminated the very space the swarm needed to exist. Stellar engineering weapons collapsed entire star systems, denying the enemy the resources they needed to rebuild. The phantom fleet struck from dimensions the swarm didn't know existed. They appeared inside enemy formations, attacked the most vulnerable targets, and vanished before retaliation was possible. But the most terrifying thing for the swarm was how quickly the humans adapted. Each attack taught them more about their enemy's weaknesses. Each victory made them more effective. They were learning from the swarm's own tactics and using them better than the swarm ever had. The first major engagement lasted 6 hours. When it ended, 3 entire swarm fleets had been reduced to debris and organic matter floating in space. The survivors were doing something that no swarm organism had ever done before. They were retreating. For billions of years, the HFY swarm had been the galaxy's ultimate predator. They had never known fear because they had never met anything stronger than themselves. Now, for the first time in their species' existence, they understood what it felt like to be prey. Admiral Park watched the enemy withdrawal with satisfaction. The first battle was over, but this was just the beginning. The swarm had tasted defeat, and they would adapt. They would learn from this encounter and become stronger, but so would humanity. And humans had one advantage that the swarm had never encountered before. They got better at war faster than anyone else. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when an unstoppable force met an immovable object. And the coalition, watching from their dying worlds, began to understand what kind of monsters they had called for salvation. Engineer Lim Sojin had seen war before, but nothing had prepared her for what she found in the aftermath of humanity's first victory against the swarm. She was part of the recovery teams that followed the 3 military units, documenting their methods and analyzing the results. What she discovered made her question everything she thought she knew about her own species. The Ghost Battalion wasn't just winning battles. They were evolving. Sojin watched through security footage as Commander Yoon's soldiers examined captured swarm biotechnology. They didn't just study it. They integrated it into their own bodies, adding alien enhancements to their already modified forms. "This is impossible," Sojin muttered as she reviewed the medical scans. "They're incorporating swarm neural pathways into their own brain implants." The ghost soldiers were becoming something beyond human recognition. Their original neural implants had eliminated fear and pain. Now they were adding the swarm's ability to share consciousness across vast distances. They were creating a hive mind of their own, one that operated on human logic and human ruthlessness. When Sojin tried to interview Yoon about the modifications, his response chilled her to the bone. "We are becoming what we need to be," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that shouldn't have been possible with human vocal cords. "The enemy learns from every encounter, so do we. The only difference is that we learn faster." Behind him, other ghost soldiers moved with perfect synchronization. They no longer needed to communicate with words or gestures. They shared thoughts directly, operating as a single organism with dozens of bodies. They had become the thing they fought, but worse. They had human imagination and human cruelty directing alien efficiency. Colonel Song's Reaper Corps faced an even more terrible choice. Deep Space Reconnaissance had discovered a swarm-occupied world with millions of coalition survivors. The aliens weren't killing their captives. They were using them as living resource farms, keeping them alive while slowly harvesting their biological materials. Song stood in her command center, looking at the tactical display. The planet below was covered in swarm biostructures that had grown around the captured cities. Millions of coalition citizens were trapped inside, being slowly consumed over months or years. "Ma'am," said Major Lim Bo-ra, "ground assault would take weeks. We'd lose thousands of troops, and most of the prisoners would die anyway." Song knew what she had to do. The Reaper Corps had been created for moments like this, when mercy became cruelty, when saving some meant sacrificing others, when the only choice was between terrible and worse. "Prepare orbital bombardment," she ordered quietly. "Full sterilization protocol." "Ma'am, the survivors died." "Major," Song's voice was ice cold. "Those people are already dead. They're just dying slowly. We can give them a clean death instead of months of torture." The bombardment lasted 3 minutes. When it was over, the planet's surface was a sheet of glass. The swarm biostructures were gone. So were the millions of coalition prisoners they had held. Song had saved them from a fate worse than death by choosing death instead. The coalition observers who witnessed the bombardment were horrified. They had asked humans for help, not genocide. But Song's response was simple and devastating. "You asked for monsters. Monsters make monster choices." Captain Nam's Phantom Fleet was discovering truths that the galaxy wasn't ready to hear. Their dimensional analysis equipment had penetrated deeper into swarm space than any other force, And what they found changed everything. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Kim Hyojin from the navigation station, "we've located what appears to be the swarm's point of origin." Nam studied the data with growing unease. The readings showed a region of space where reality itself was damaged. Dimensional barriers were thin, and something was bleeding through from another universe entirely. "It's not a species," Kim continued. "It's a weapon. The Vashti swarm was created by something else. Something that doesn't exist in our reality anymore." The implications were staggering. The swarm wasn't just a hostile alien race. It was a designed weapon, created by an extinct civilization as the ultimate cleansing tool. It had been programmed to consume everything in its path, growing stronger with each victory until nothing remained but itself. "Sir," Kim said quietly, "there are more of them. Dozens of other swarms, all dormant, all waiting to be activated. What we're fighting is just one finger of something much larger." Nam processed this information with the enhanced awareness his dimensional exposure had given him. He could see possibilities and connections that normal humans couldn't perceive. And what he saw terrified him. "Send a priority message to Admiral Park," he ordered. "Tell him we need to talk privately." Scientist Baek Tae-min was making discoveries that kept him awake at night. As the chief researcher studying captured swarm biotechnology, he had access to samples from every major engagement. What he found in his laboratory made him question whether humanity was still fighting for the right reasons. "Dr. Lee," he said into his communicator, "you need to see this." Dr. Lee arrived at the laboratory to find Baek staring at a holographic display showing human brain scans. "These are from the Ghost Battalion soldiers," Baek explained. "Look at the neural pathway modifications. The scans showed brains that were no longer entirely human. The soldiers had integrated swarm biotechnology so thoroughly that their thought patterns were changing. They were becoming more efficient, more coordinated, more ruthless, but they were also becoming something alien. It gets worse," Beck continued. "The Reaper Corps crews are showing psychological changes from their exposure to the weapons they're using. Prolonged contact with extinction-level technology is affecting their empathy responses. They're starting to see destruction as the solution to every problem. And the Phantom Fleet, they exist partially outside normal space-time now. Their connection to baseline humanity is becoming tenuous. They're developing abilities that we don't understand, and motivations that we can't predict." Lee absorbed this information with growing dread. "Are you saying our own forces are being corrupted?" "I'm saying they're adapting. The same quality that makes them effective against the swarm is changing them into something that might be just as dangerous." The coalition survivors were beginning to understand what they had unleashed. Ambassador Oh Min-seo had been monitoring human communications since the first engagement, and what she heard made her wish they had never sent that original plea for help. "They're not the same species that answered our call," she reported to the coalition's emergency council. "Each battle changes them. They're becoming something new, something that operates on logic we can't understand." The human forces no longer responded to normal diplomatic channels. They communicated among themselves in ways that coalition technology couldn't intercept. Their strategies made sense only in retrospect, after the destruction was complete. "They saved the Korath system by destroying its sun," O continued. "Billions of swarm organisms died instantly, but so did the 3 remaining coalition colonies in that system. When we protested, their response was that dead colonies can't be consumed by the enemy. The worst part was that the humans were right. Their brutal mathematics worked. Every system they liberated was completely free of swarm infestation. The price was that nothing else survived either. We asked for monsters," O said quietly. "We're getting them. The question is whether we'll survive our salvation." Admiral Park received reports from all 3 military units as they pushed deeper into swarm territory. Each report showed the same pattern: stunning tactical success coupled with disturbing changes in the forces achieving it. The Ghost Battalion had become a hybrid human swarm organism that thought with dozens of minds simultaneously. The Reaper Corps treated extinction as a standard military tool. The Phantom Fleet operated according to logic that existed partially outside normal reality. But they were winning. System after system fell to the human advance. The swarm, which had never been defeated, was being systematically destroyed by forces that adapted faster than they could counter. Park knew that humanity was paying a price for this victory. The soldiers who returned from each battle were less human than when they left. But the alternative was the consumption of everything they had sworn to protect. In the end, the choice was simple. Better to be saved by monsters than consumed by them. The galaxy would have to live with whatever humanity became in the process of saving it. The war was far from over, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The only question was what would remain when the monsters finished their work. 6 months after the first human ship entered Coalition space, the Vashatai swarm ceased to exist, not defeated, not scattered, not driven back to wherever they had come from. Completely eliminated. Every bioship, every organism, every trace of genetic material had been systematically located and destroyed. The threat that had consumed hundreds of civilizations over thousands of years was simply gone. But the galaxy had paid a price that no one had anticipated. Admiral Park stood on the bridge of his flagship, which no longer resembled the vessel that had first entered swarm territory. It was now a fusion of human engineering and alien biotechnology, with corridors that seemed to grow and shift on their own. The ship was alive in ways that human technology had never been before. Around him, his crew moved with the perfect coordination of a hive mind. They still looked human mostly, but their eyes held a light that hadn't been there before. They communicated without speaking, sharing information through neural links that connected them to the ship's living systems. "Report," Park said, though he already knew the answer. Through the quantum entanglement network that connected all human forces, the last swarm, "Stronghold has been eliminated," came the response from multiple voices speaking in perfect unison. "Total enemy casualties, approximately 12 billion organisms. Human casualties, 0. It was an impossible victory ratio, but it came with an equally impossible cost. The humans who had achieved it were no longer entirely human. Commander Yoon's Ghost Battalion had become something that terrified even other human military units. They existed as a collective consciousness spread across dozens of bodies, each one capable of independent action, while sharing the thoughts and experiences of the whole. They could operate in perfect vacuum, survive direct exposure to stellar radiation, and process information at speeds that broke human understanding. When Coalition scientists tried to interview them, the experience was disturbing. The soldiers would answer questions in chorus, their voices harmonizing in ways that human vocal cords shouldn't have been able to produce. They spoke of themselves in plural terms, as if individual identity had become meaningless. "We are what humanity needed us to become," they would say, when asked about their transformation. "The enemy required a response beyond human limitations. We provided that response." Colonel Song's Reaper Corps had evolved into something even more frightening. They no longer saw destruction as a tool of war. They saw it as a natural law that they were privileged to enforce. Their ships carried weapons that could unweave matter at the quantum level, delete entire star systems from reality, or collapse dimensional barriers to drop pieces of hostile universes onto their enemies. Song herself had become the high priestess of a military cult, dedicated to the principle that some threats could only be answered with absolute extinction. Her followers spoke of their work with religious reverence, seeing themselves as the guardians of reality itself. "Creation and destruction are equal forces," Song would explain to horrified observers. "We have chosen to serve destruction because it is honest. When something threatens all life, half measures are a betrayal of everything worth protecting." Captain Nam's Phantom Fleet had transcended physical existence almost entirely. Their ships existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and their crews had developed abilities that seemed to violate the basic laws of physics. They could predict enemy movements by observing probability streams, step partially out of time to avoid attacks, and strike targets that existed in parallel realities. Nam himself had become something that most humans couldn't look at directly. He existed in too many dimensions at once, his form shifting between possible versions of himself. When he spoke, his words came from multiple timelines simultaneously. "Linear thinking is a limitation we have overcome," he would tell those brave enough to communicate with him. "The enemy thought in 4 dimensions. We learned to think in 12. Superiority is always a matter of perspective." Dr. Lee Dongwu found himself in the impossible position of trying to manage relationships between humanity and the rest of the galaxy when humanity itself was becoming something alien. He established the Terran Oversight Protocols, a system designed to ensure that the transformed human forces would protect the galaxy rather than conquer it. The protocols were simple, but absolute. The 3 military units would remain active, monitoring space for existential threats. They would respond to any force that threatened multiple species or entire civilizations, but they would operate under strict limitations, engaging only when conventional forces were insufficient. Think of them as antibodies, Lee explained to the reformed Galactic Council. They exist to protect the organism of galactic civilization from threats that would otherwise destroy it. But antibodies that become too active can kill the patient they're meant to protect. The coalition species that had originally called for help found themselves living in a galaxy that was safer but also stranger than anything they had imagined. Humanity's 3 military units patrolled the edges of known space, watching for threats that might require their intervention. Pirates and raiders had simply stopped operating. The mere possibility that their actions might attract the attention of the Ghost Battalion, the Reaper Corps, or the Phantom Fleet was enough to end most criminal enterprises. A few foolish groups had tested human patience and had been eliminated so thoroughly that their species' languages had no words to describe what had happened to them. But the transformed humans were also protecting the galaxy in ways that most species couldn't perceive. They had learned to detect dimensional incursions before they became visible. They monitored quantum fluctuations that might indicate the emergence of new swarm-type weapons. They watched for signs that other extinct civilizations might have left active doomsday devices. Analyst Han Yu-jin, now Director of Galactic Affairs, maintained the delicate balance between human power and galactic stability. She was one of the few baseline humans who could still communicate effectively with the transformed military units, and she served as their link to normal human society. "They're not human anymore," she admitted in her private reports to Earth. "But they're still ours. They remember what they were protecting, even if they can't feel it the same way anymore." The galaxy had learned to live with its new guardians. Trade flourished under their protection. Scientific advancement accelerated as species shared knowledge without fear of conquest. Art and culture bloomed in a way that hadn't been seen since the ancient peaceful eras. But everyone knew the price that had been paid. Humanity had saved the galaxy by sacrificing part of its own soul. The monsters they had created to fight the swarm would never be human again, but they would never stop protecting what humanity had once been. The final message that went out to all galactic species was broadcast simultaneously from Earth and from the transformed fleets patrolling the void. It was simple, clear, and absolute. Earth protects. Earth remembers. Earth endures. The galaxy is safe under our watch. Do not make us choose between your survival and your comfort again. Most species understood the message. They had been saved by beings who had given up everything to become capable of that salvation. The price of peace was accepting that their protectors were no longer the species that had originally answered their plea for help. But in the deepest files of human government, a single report summarized the real truth of what had happened. It was written by Han Yu-jin and classified at the highest levels. They pleaded for salvation. Earth sent its monsters. The monsters won, but in doing so they became something that transcends both salvation and damnation. The galaxy is protected by beings who remember being human, but can never be human again. This was the price of victory. We can only hope it was worth paying. The Vashti swarm was extinct. The galaxy was safe, and somewhere in the darkness between stars, 3 fleets of transformed humans continued their eternal watch, making sure that nothing like the swarm could ever threaten the worlds they had sworn to protect. They had become exactly what the galaxy needed, monsters capable of destroying any threat, no matter how impossible. The only question that remained was whether the galaxy they were protecting would remember to be grateful, or whether it would eventually decide that its protectors had become a threat themselves. But that was a problem for future generations. For now, peace reigned under the watchful eyes of humanity's monsters, and that was enough.